Hello guys, so I have a little confession to make. I don't shoot RAW anymore. I shoot JPEGs only. And today I'm going to be showing you guys how I do that. Let's get into it. So the other day I asked you guys on my stories what I could help you with, and a few of you, about 4 or 5 of you, asked me about color grading. And whilst I do not claim to be any sort of expert on color grading, I thought that I could still help you guys. At least I could show you guys how I grade my work and how I get the colors the way I want it to look. Basically, color grading can be really tricky. It can, it's hard to always get a consistent look when you're shooting in different lighting situations, when you're shooting different things. Different colors look different all the time, depending on what sort of, depending on the lighting situation. Sometimes a blue in tungsten light can look completely different in the midday sun, and can look completely different again in the, in golden hour. In order to get consistent colors that you like, it's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of tweaking, a lot of trial and error, but once you have all the components that I'm going to talk to you about, your workflow will be really quick, really easy. Firstly, why would you ever want to shoot just JPEGs? Well, for me personally, it's because I'm lazy and because I'm also cheap. Lazy because I've realized that when I shoot RAW, yes, it's very nice to have all that flexibility with your exposure and the color depth, but really, at the end of the day, when I compare the Fujifilm simulations with what I can get with the RAWs, I'm always just thinking to myself, you know what, the Fuji simulation looks a lot better. I just prefer it. So I'm lazy in that sense. And two, RAW files, if you shoot hundreds and hundreds of RAW files just on a short walk, it's expensive. That storage is expensive, and I like to use the Samsung, the Samsung T5 portable SSD. They are not cheap. Even shooting JPEG, I can still push the exposure. I can still push all the sliders quite far, even with the JPEGs. So in order to shoot the JPEG life and to leave RAWs behind, what you need to do is you've got to figure out what your color palette is, because once you figure out what your color palette is, then it'll become a lot easier to figure out the rest of the stages in this process. Past year or so, I've taken great inspiration from Josh K. Jackson, Josh K. Jack on Instagram. His work, the reds and the oranges and yellows and the blues are always very saturated, very dark, very moody. If you take a quick scroll through my Instagram as in Reason Photo, you'll likely notice that there is a distinct sort of reddish tinge, a distinct reddish yellowy orange tinge, and that is deliberate obviously. So where does it start? It starts with the camera setup with a custom Fuji recipe. Obviously all these steps could most likely be applicable to any camera brand. So the recipe I have on my X-T3 and my X100V is basically the Portrait 160 recipe from Fuji X Weekly, classic chrome, and then you drop down the shadows, you drop down the highlights, drop down sharpness, you up the color by 1, and you tweak the white balance. And as you'll see on my white balance, I have obviously, because I've gone for a yellow reddish look to my color palette, I have gone a bit further down on the red quadrant on the white balance there. And basically you can stop there because Fuji colors are amazing and the Fuji JPEGs are incredible. You don't need to edit anymore. If you get your exposure right, you don't need to edit. I say that because I'm going to be contradicting myself in this video, but it's just because I found that the color grade is such a small part of the equation. What's more important is the lighting, it's the subject matter, it's sort of the actual colors that are in the frame in real life, that take, that have more bearing on the final outcome. Anyways, moving on. Then the lighting situation. Not quite golden hour, but about an hour or so before that. Because I found that golden hour, whilst yes, it's gorgeous and it's very golden and orange, I find it to be a bit too intense on the orange, a bit too intense on the red, and I get less flexibility in the colors because it sort of just blends all the colors into one. You know, everything just looks orange. The blues look orange, the yellows look orange, the whites look orange, everything looks red and orange. Whereas if I shoot a couple of hours beforehand, yes, I get that a nice bit of warmth. The images feel warm. You know, the colors still look separate. You know, you can still discern everything. But also, I found that neon lights work really well with, you know, fit in really well with my sort of color scheme and my color palette, because at night, especially in London, in Soho, where I love to shoot, there's a lot of neon lights. Hey, neon lights, way, take a drink. Each time a photographer mentions that they like neon lights, neon lights, and also tungsten street lamps. And you know, tungsten street lamps are obviously you know, they're very yellowy, so that fits in well with my color palette. And the neon lights they tend to be red. Now I've taken the images, I look at the image and I think to myself, does this need anything? Do I honestly need to edit this? You know, back in the day, I used to feel like a compulsion. I felt like I had to edit the image. You know, I felt like if I didn't edit the image, then the image would be incomplete, which is silly. The little set I've made is called Josh K. Jack because, as I said before, it's heavily influenced by him and his images. And I have a few sort of presets. One is for better skin tones, because I found that some of these presets, that, you know, they sort of turn skin tones look, you know, they kind of turn into that, like, what is that? So but then I just sort of toggle between all of them and I see which one works the best. And for this image, I think for Portrait 160, because I also use these presets on my film scans, I think this one works the best, because that's the thing that you want to really look out for, the skin tones. You know, you don't want the skin tones to look too funky. I will admit that this look is very stylized. It's not going to be to everyone's cup of tea. I don't want to get too bogged down with the details of a preset, because these are things that apply to me. This is what I like, and it's not going to be that useful for you. You need to figure out what your preset preference is. You need to figure out what you like the most, because you might not like how moody this is. You might want it to be, you know, you might want it to be a bit lighter. You might want it to look flatter or something. I've taken the image into Lightroom and I've settled on this preset, and now I think to myself, okay, what do I need to change? What needs to be done? What do I want to accentuate? What do I need to bring back down? You know, this is where I think to myself, okay, what do we need to fix here? Firstly, it's underexposed, so I'm just going to bring up the exposure. Then I'm looking at, you know, I want her skin, I want her face, I want her hair, the highlights on her to stand out. So I'm going to bring up the highlights, and I'm also going to bring up the whites. Maybe bring up the exposure just a bit more. Then I'm also going to bring up the shadows, because I feel like just so we get a bit more detail down below. And then I'm going to keep the blacks down there, because I want to keep that moodiness, because if you bring up the blacks too much, then you lose that moodiness, which some of you might want, but I want a bit more moodiness. So this is also really important when it comes to your color grading. I would say that this is the most important part, the calibration section of the sliders. If you play around with these sliders, then once you settle on that, this will make your color grading so much easier, and this is where you'll really get consistent colors across your work. I can't really explain how it works because I don't really know, but all I know is that it sort of brings all your colors back to the same starting point every single time. This sort of setup gives me the colors I want most of the time, and I always try to not fuss too much. I feel like if I do too much, if I fiddle around with everything too much, then that's when things start to look gross and wrong. Also, I just forgot to mention here, in the color grading section of the sliders, I add a touch of red to the shadows and a touch of yellow to the highlights, because as I said, the color palette I'm going for is a red, yellow, orangey look. Anyways guys, that's the video. That is my process. I didn't want to get too bogged down with the details and nitty-gritty, because the individual details, the specifics of it, that's what you guys need to figure out. I thought I'd just show you my process. So the process that I came up with is, firstly, come up with a color palette. Think of 2 different colors that you like, that you really enjoy. Maybe it's teal and orange, maybe it's, I don't know, green and red, whatever it is. Figure out what color palette you want, come up with a custom profile picture in your camera, and then come up with a set of presets that, that work with your color palette. And once you set that all up, then you're gonna find that you're not gonna be needing your raw images. You're not gonna need raw files, because you've done 90% of the work there. You will have done pretty much all of the work in camera. Follow me at Zain Reads a Photo on Instagram. Subscribe so you don't miss a thing. And with all that said and done, boys and girls, I'll see you all in the next one.